G'day audiophiles. Coming up on the Sirens of Audio, we are going to be talking about the forthcoming event this weekend with Sophie Aldred in Sydney. Going to be giving you a little preview of that. We're also going to be diving down the rabbit hole where we talk about what type of fan events that Philip and I like. We're also going to be doing a review, what we've been listening to. Philip's got a podcast. I've been listening to the latest Target audio book. And we have got some special footage from the recent event that Janet Fielding had in Brisbane with special guest Jason Haigh-Ellery. So we're going to be sharing some of that footage as well with some interview with him and some Q&A with the audience too. Thanks for tuning in to the Sirens of Audio. Stick around. G'day audiophiles, this is the Sirens of Audio, the show that explores the universe of Doctor Who in the audio medium. I'm Dwayne.
And I'm Philip. G'day Dwayne, g'day audiophiles.
G'day Philip. I always like to know how are you, so how are you?
I am great, thank you. It's a bit strange actually because we're recording in daylight, which is unusual for us because usually we're fairly late at night.
Very bright in the background, isn't it?
It is, and usually when we record during the day, it all mucks up in different ways because we're just never awake. But we'll see how we go. I'm great. How are you going, Dwayne?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Massive internet problems. Who in Australia loves the NBN, eh? And all the companies that like to pass the blame to everyone else. That's what I've been dealing with. So I'm feeling a little bit frustrated. Hopefully you can calm me down, Philip.
I don't know, but I'll do my best if I can.
Do your best?
Maybe just need to leave Tasmania for a few days and get away from it all.
I reckon I should. Maybe I'll just get out of here on Friday. What do you reckon?
Yeah, why not? Come up to Sydney. Join us.
Yeah. What's going on in Sydney on the weekend?
On the weekend, we have Sophie Aldred arriving. So,
that sounds fantastic. I must go to that.
Yeah, come and see Sophie. It'll be great.
So, yes, we are going to be talking a little bit about that event, but as a sort of a teaser, shall we say?
Well, to what not you really might quite that, but yes, maybe.
A teaser / retrospective. We have got something lined up for you for this episode that is very exciting. What's that, Philip?
We have Jason Haigh-Ellery talking about all sorts of bits and pieces. So a couple of weeks ago, I think people know Janet was appearing in Brisbane, and Jason Haigh-Ellery also came up for the day to spend with us. And he was interviewed and was also there for a Q&A time with Janet. And we've just put together the most relevant parts that deal with Big Finish and audio stuff. There's other stuff he talked about that you had to be there to hear, which you weren't. If you weren't, you've missed out. But we've pulled together some of the key moments of his interview, some of the key questions he was asked. Janet's in there as well a bit because she sort of, when he was being interviewed, she couldn't shut up at times and had to butt in. But also some of the questions were to her and to Jason. So if it's to both, we've left that in as well. So Janet's in it a bit, but the focus is really on Jason and on Big Finish and the company.
Yes, and of course the interview and Q&A was being hosted by Spencer Howson. So thanks to Spencer as well.
Yes, I mean, I don't think many people outside. Well, I'm not sure many people outside of Brisbane would necessarily know who Spencer is. Spencer, right. we have our British, BBC versions, ABC, Australian Broadcasting Commission, and Spencer Howson was one of the biggest names on ABC for about 20 years. He hosted the Brisbane Morning Show, so he was very well known across all of Brisbane for doing that. A couple of years ago, he decided to branch out and do something a bit different, so he left the ABC, which was shock horror for everyone. But he has some other plans coming up as well. So, but yes, lovely guy and a huge Doctor Who fan. And he actually did the interviewing during the day with Janet and Jason and a few other bits and pieces as well. So you will hear his voice as well.
And we should give a huge shout out to Nat. Is it Bachansky? Is that the pronunciation of the surname?
Yep.
So she's behind the organisation Act React. And she also has a podcast called, Philip?
Raven On.
Raven On. So Big Finish writer Tom Selinsky has made many appearances on Raven On, and so we can recommend that podcast too. And it's Nat's fine organisational skills that got the Brisbane event together for us.
She did. And she did a great job. So her podcast is a pop culture podcast. It started off doing, I can't think what it's called. House of the Dragon. Before that was before
Game of Thrones?
Game of Thrones. So it started off being a Games of Thrones podcast. And then when Games of Thrones is off air, she does other things. At the moment, they're working their way through all of the Fast and Furious films, which, to be honest, I'd never watched before. And so I'm halfway through movie 6, and the first 4 were sort of, I enjoyed them. They were nothing much, and then film 5 started, film 6, and they're ridiculous. Like nothing. I don't know how to describe them, but they're blown out of total proportion what it was. So anyhow, she does a great podcast. She also does hot takes on Doctor Who episodes as well. So Raven On, it's really worth a listen to.
Excellent. I wonder if you liked this last episode, Philip. We talked about our recommendations and what we've been listening to before we got into the main topic of our podcast and even the rabbit hole topic. I don't know if you like that, but let's do it again.
Oh, really?
So what have you been listening to? I'd like to know, because I know it's your turn to tell us all about what you're listening to right now.
Yeah, we could have pre-warned me about that, and I would have got it up beforehand. I am going to recommend a podcast, which is going to be irrelevant for most people around the world, but I'm really enjoying it. It is called, if I can find it, here you go, Black Box, TV Black Box. It is by a...
That's Robert McKnight, isn't it?
It is Robert McKnight. He's Australian journalist Robert McKnight, who is also a huge Doctor Who fan, also from Queensland. And amusingly, Spencer Howson, who did the interviewing for Janet Fielding, had Robert McKnight take his place, because Spencer Howson has a program on Saturdays, a radio program on Saturdays, and he couldn't do it because he was going to be at the Doctor Who event. And without telling Robert McKnight why he wanted the day off, he organised for Robert McKnight to take his shift. And then once it swapped shifts, then he said, oh, by the way, it's because I'm interviewing Janet. And so Robert McKnight couldn't go because he had to be on air to replace Spencer Howson. Anyhow, that's their business. They can work them out for themselves. But in the process of all these stories and connecting with people in Queensland, I found out about this podcast production called The Black Box, which is a TV industry podcast. And so I guess I first heard it because they interviewed Janet Fielding in the lead up to her coming to the event in Queensland, and so I wanted to listen to that. But I've been listening to it every week, and it is absolutely fascinating in terms of an industry person speaking about the industry. So it's an examination of what's happening in Australian television, radio, bit of theatre, I think, now and then, and just discussing things that are happening. So as a person who loves a bit of industry gossip and what's going on, I've just found it to be a really fascinating podcast. So it probably hasn't got a lot of relevance for people outside of Australia, but for people in Australia, it's really interesting to know. They talk about people. The Australian version of MasterChef. I'm not sure people would be aware of this, but one of the hosts of MasterChef died a week or so ago, and of course that was just before the whole series was about to start. Tragically, he took his own life. And then so there's all this discussion in terms of what would Channel 10 do now, and so it's an interesting discussion in terms of, well, how does a television program respond when your main star has suddenly died before you're about to release a whole season of material? And so they were discussing what they thought they could do and what they would do, and it was interesting seeing that Channel 10 actually did basically everything that they suggested in the lead up to previewing the first episode on Sunday night. So yeah, it's a fascinating podcast that deals with issues like that, deals with the media, deals with all sorts of other things that are happening. They make predictions about what shows will be gone in 6 months' time. And it causes a bit of a stir as people say, no, that's not going from within the industry. But it's fascinating to have an industry person discussing the industry. Now, what about you, Dwayne? What are you listening to?
I have been listening to the newly released audio version of the Target novel Warriors of the Deep, which is read by Janet Fielding. Very interestingly, it's Janet's first full audiobook reading. I wasn't aware of that. Were you aware of that previously, Philip?
I was, and during the course of the Brisbane event, she let slip that she's done another. So it's not very good. Yeah, this is just her first audiobook reading, because there will be another audiobook reading at
Oh,
least.
what's the other one? What's the other one that hasn't been released yet?
I don't know.
From that era.
I didn't go.
I'd have to have a look.
Yeah, I think it's actually a couple still to go.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
No,
So
very
yes,
good. So I've been listening to that, and Terrence Dicks doesn't, unlike the other authors, he doesn't go on massive sidesteps and put in all these huge detailed stories, but he puts in just enough to expand it out and make it really interesting nonetheless. So there's some interesting ways that he wrote the characters in the story. He goes into a bit of detail about the political situation in that time. It's very, very well. It's the Cold War basically, and it's interesting to look back at that time when he wrote that you could not imagine a world without the Cold War being on in some way, shape, or form at the time, could you? It was just that heavily entrenched. So it was easy to imagine that it would still be going 100 years later. Also, there's a bit of background on the character Solo, which kind of softens her a bit, whether it's Ingrid Pitt's performance in the TV show that made her quite hard. In the book, she's a little bit softer, a little bit more, she's kind of being dragged along by the other guy, and I can't remember. Is it Nilsson?
Oh,
Nilsson is the other bad guy, who they're both spies, but yeah, he's kind of dragging Solo along. Interesting, some of the pronunciations that just get let go by various readers, not just Janet. So she was calling her Dr. Solo throughout the whole book, whereas in the TV series it's Solo, almost like a double L. And then the Sea Devil Warrior, she was pronouncing it it sounded cervix. I don't know whether it was because I had it on slightly faster speed, so it sounded like cervix all the way through. It's actually Salvix. And I always thought that Salvix had an L in it, but because of the way they pronounce it on the TV series, but no, it's Sauvix, so Salvix. But Janet was pronouncing it cervix, which I found a little bit disconcerting at times. But yeah, really, really good to get. And she was also doing an accent for Solo as well, which was, obviously she'd been told that Ingrid Pitt played this. She had to add the accent, so she was putting it on. The sound effects were great, done by Simon Power. I love Simon Power. He's very intricate in his sound design, and whenever he does anything for Big Finish, I often find that his ones are some of my favourite of all time. He doesn't do much for them, but when he does a fantastic job. So great on the sound design there. So it's really enjoyable. I know you've just started it, but I finished it today, and it was really enjoyable all the way through.
Yeah, I'm only 2 chapters in, but I'm certainly enjoying it so far. It's Terrence Dicks' later period. He started going back to adding a bit more characterization. He starts off really well, really strong, lovely rounded characters, great writing. I think there's a middle period where he's just churning them out. And it's basically word for word off the TV, hardly anything added.
105 pages.
120, but nothing added, and just it really was just almost word for word verbatim with a couple of things just to do a bit of description. But by War is the Deep again, towards his later period, he's actually adding a lot more color, description, etc. So I do like his later. I think his first period is my favorite, and his later period is good as well. Middle period, it's the story, but nothing much else. But yeah, no, I'm enjoying.
I like too that the book describes I like the way the book describes the Silurian triad, because as this must have been my first experience of Warriors of the Deep was the Target novel, because when I watched the TV show, I recall no mention of the fact that this was the scientist from the Silurians story. So the third member of that threesome, in the third Doctor episode, they don't mention it. They mention the triad, but they don't go into detail in the TV series. So I like the way that's fleshed out too. Bit of history on the Silurians.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, so on that note, Philip, do you know what?
What?
It's time to jump down the rabbit hole. Let's go. All right, here's a question that I literally thought up 2 seconds ago as I was pointing down. Philip, I would like to know your thoughts on this topic. we've got a convention coming up this weekend. We're doing our very best to please the fans with something that hasn't been happening in Doctor Who sort of conventions for a while. What do you like in a Doctor Who convention? I know I am very keen to get over to a Big Finish Day. I would love to get to a Big Finish Day at some point over the next couple of years. But what is it that you like about Doctor Who conventions? What do you want in one?
Well, I'm I'm totally creating what I want in a Doctor Who convention, so you just have to come along and find out. I guess for me, it's about feeling like you've connected with the guest, and so I want as many opportunities as possible to connect with the guests. And so, as I say, I think an interview is an important part to actually have someone who's actually well prepared and thought through questions, and to get out a lot of information material from the guest early on. So I love that opportunity just to hear and absorb and have someone who thought through intelligent questions. But that being said, I also love the questions from the fans because they come from totally different angles, and so you never know where they're going to come from. And so it's a great joy. Scarily, yeah. And so that's been lots of fun in terms of just hearing, where the fans' questions are going to come from. Jana suggested for us, and we're going to do it for Sophie again too. She suggested doing a quiz. Oh, she says the quiz does suggest a quiz. Someone suggested a quiz. I think I suggested a quiz. She said she wanted to run it. That's right.
That's right.
So yeah. So because I just thought it would be fun to have I remember long ago when I was very young, the Australian Doctor Who Club put on a mastermind, and when you arrived, you actually got a sheet of like 50 questions, and you'd fill out the sheet with all your answers. That would then get handed and marked, and then the top 5 or so people were then brought on to do a mastermind. I didn't want to do anything that complicated. That was going to be much too much work. And so I just thought a quiz would be lots of fun and just, once again, another way of getting out information. But Janice suggested she ran it, and it was so much fun because she ran the quiz. And so she had things she could add for every question afterwards. So it's just another way of very wide, broad topics, getting it out. And then the other thing that we did for Janet, which we really enjoyed, was just one-word responses. I'm going to give you a topic and name a story, give me a word or just a sentence that comes to mind, and just those quick fire questions. And that was, I think, a fun way to finish off the afternoon as well. Because I said it's about close contacts, and so the autographing and the photographing makes us enough time for people to actually talk and say hi. And certainly that to me is really important. And all the guests of Doctor Who I've ever seen are really treasure meeting, talking to the fans, and they give them a lot of attention and care, and it's one of the things I've always respected about the Doctor Who cast. What about you, Dwayne? What do you like about her?
Well, I'm a bit of an old school fan, so I do like that close contact. Like my first big convention was Whovention, the first Whovention with Nick Courtney. Katie Manning was there also. So just those. Was there anyone else there? Did you get to that one?
No, that was just Nicholas Courtney and Katie Manning, the first one.
Yeah. So that was really good. Then other day events where the Sydney Club would put together events with 1 or 2 guests that might be a little bit obscure from time to time. I thought they were really interesting as well, and you had the chance to actually chat with these people. Whereas some of the larger things that I've been to this century. Sounding really old now when I say this century, it's a bit more like a production line, like you sort of pumped through, like I think you called it a sausage factory. And it's very expensive. So to get photographs and autographs, yes, those prices are there. Like that never used to be the case. You'd pay your entry fee and then get a couple of autographs on the day when the guest was having a break. But it's just not how things work. So the economics of it don't work that way. But I would like to provide good value for money rather than just 2 seconds with a guest and then you're off again, next person. There's a bit more of a chance to actually have some meaningful interaction. And yes, the economics are different, but if we can change the dynamic and create that more personal interaction with a little bit longer if possible, then I think that's good. Increasing the value for money these days.
Yeah, I agree.
Very good. All right. With that said, let's climb up out of the rabbit hole. And in a couple of days' time, we are going to be having Sophie's event, as has been mentioned, but we've got a couple of other guests that are coming too. Virgin New Adventures authors Kate Orman and John Blum are going to be there. They've also worked for Big Finish, both in Doctor Who and Blake Seven. They've written books for Blake Seven published by Big Finish, so keep that in mind, Blake Seven fans. So, but not only that, they are going to be interviewed by Dave from the Doctor Who show. So that should be fun too, Philip.
Yeah, he's flying up from Melbourne because he wanted to come to the Sydney event. So that's really looking forward to seeing Dave and meeting him in person as well. Because once again, podcasts I've listened to for years, and you feel like you know someone, but I'm actually looking forward to meeting him in person.
Yeah, it'd be great. Okay, so tell us about what's coming up right now, Philip.
Well, as mentioned, this is part of an interview and part of a Q&A time with Jason Haigh-Ellery that we had in Brisbane. And yeah, enjoy.
Tell us about your Doctor Who childhood.
Oh, right.
Who was your doctor?
Who was my doctor? Well, my first doctor was John Pertwee. Woo! And funnily enough, Gary Russell and I sat down one day, as you do as Doctor Who fans, and worked out what my first memory, what that led to in terms of what the story was. And I remembered little bits of something, and he immediately went, that was the Sea Devils, and you were too young to have seen that properly live and remember it, so it must have been a repeat.
Okay, yeah.
So it's the repeat of the Sea Devils. So I do remember when John regenerated into Tom Baker and being very disturbed and confused, as a lot of, how old was I? I was 6 at the time, and I was very upset, and everyone was. And we were like, we're not watching Doctor Who anymore, it's rubbish. Now they've got this curly, dark curly guy with his scarf, and it's rubbish, rubbish. Within 3 weeks, we were playing it in the playground, and I was Harry Sullivan.
Yes. You would have had I think Malcolm Hulk wrote the book of the Sea Devils from memory.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes, you did. Yes.
Because you were into what got me reading was those Target Doctor Who books,
totally.
And I think that's your memory as well, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Same generation. There was a Target was part of the Penguin Book Club, and we used to get a discount from the school if you bought it through the school. So basically, they had all these different books, and the only thing I was interested in was buying the Doctor Who books.
Yeah.
So I'm one of these people who does still have every single Doctor Who book.
Have you got them all still? Oh man.
We had there's this shed in the garden, and it's a very big one, and I didn't realise it actually had a loft. So we cleared that all out and turned it into a yoga studio. Janet and I were talking about yoga this morning.
We were.
It's something I would advise. And all the stuff went into the loft. And now my wife is delighted because all my geeky stuff is in the loft. So
Contained.
yes.
But my peak with the Target novelisations was when Warriors of the Deep came out, and I just had to have it. And it's the only one I bought as a hardback. And I bought it in Spring Hill, so not too far from where we are today. I don't know how old I was, 13, 14. It's funny, you just hold on to feelings. And to this day, I feel the excitement when I opened and smelled that Warrior. And the kids of today,
No idea, kids.
buy physical things, buy DVDs, buy CDs.
Well, it's the amazing thing about Big Finish is when I talk to people in the industry. I was at APAC the other day, which is the Audio Publishing Association in New York, and they had this big conference, and I was in there, and I said, oh yeah, we sell 25% of our productions are still sold on CD. And they were like, what? Because so many audio production companies and audio books, etc., they haven't produced CDs in years.
Yeah.
But we're still doing it because people like the physicality of it and collecting it and being there and getting them signed.
There's something very special about it. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was seminal for me. The audio, I think probably the TV show first, then the albums that were released, then I went back to the original radio series and then subsequently bought them all. What Douglas Adams did was, he really paved the way for what you've been doing more recently, but that was that was revolutionary, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I've been into, we're a very successful audio company. We're quite respected in the industry. I think the fan mentality is to have something there which you connect to, like you say, with the books and so forth. And I think I was very proud to be asked to do the introduction. I did a fan film called Shakedown many years ago, which is available on YouTube. Don't even ask. There's a long story about that. And Shakedown is a fun project, but Terrence Dicks wrote it and I script edited it. So I scripted Terrence Dicks when I was like 23. So it was because we grew up. I learned how to read by reading Terrence Dicks' books.
He's the best.
Yeah.
We're always the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And when Terrence died, there was a whole generation of writers, whether it's Paul Cornell or anyway, a lot of big name writers came out and said they learnt to read by reading Terrence Dicks' Doctor Who books. That's what we did. And so I was very honoured to be asked to, because I produced the film of Shakedown. When Terrence did the novelisation of Shakedown, which was a lot expanded, because it was only an hour movie and it was expanded, I got to write the introduction. And I said, when I was a child, there were no videos, there were no DVDs, there were no repeats in the UK. My form of an understanding of Doctor Who was to read the books. And it was a form of time travel for us, because we got to go back in time and to engage with programs we never heard of before until we got the books out. So it was, those books were very important to us.
I think you mentioned the BBC's drama output, audio drama. I think the ABC stops now.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. It's very rare.
Yeah.
I mean, I speak to people in America and I've given up now. I just say it's like podcasting, because there's no other way of explaining it.
So radio plays, which are now audio drama, have sort of gone through phases, haven't they?
Mm.
And I credit Douglas Adams as really a high, but podcasting, which you could see as competition for your product,
yes,
has brought people, and as someone who's worked in radio for 30 years, I know that podcasting has just increased audio listening in general, hasn't it?
It has. It has been good for the industry, I think. What hasn't been so good is that obviously podcasting is generally free. Obviously Apple have now brought out a subscription service which you pay for every month, but the vast majority are free, which means that they survive through sponsorship and advertising, which is great. But it does mean there's an awful lot of people who do illegally download and don't see any issues with this from the point of view of piracy. And I'm not going to stand up here and have a great rant about piracy. It happens, it's fine. We know that we are pirated a lot. And it's something which we are very aware of. It's a little bit like the road to Damascus, in that the amount of times I've been at conventions and fans have come up to me and said, oh yeah, there's this and this, and it's like, oh yeah, okay. I said, where'd you get that from? And they're like, oh, I legally downloaded it, but I now buy some of your stuff because I feel I should support you. And I was like, oh, thank you. That's great. Because, we're only here if people buy our products. And the weirdest thing is, no one knows who I am unless you're a Doctor Who fan. That is, no one else is going to know who I am. The amount of times I'm actually recognised, which is ridiculous. And that gives me, in my head, I'm like, that's how much we're illegally downloaded.
Well, it shows the impact that you've had, whether it's illegally or legally. And you have, I said at the top of the afternoon that a lot of people credit Big Finish with in fact, with Doctor Who coming back in 2005, because you kept the excitement, the fandom, and the brand going, and you should be very, very proud of what you did.
Russell's been very vocal on, the fact that Big Finish, he actually put it in we did a book called The Inside Story for Big Finish, which was a very honest account, of the first 5 years of Big Finish. And it's a great read. Reading it back now, we would never put that book out today because there was no such thing as brand back then. So and it's a great fun read, etc., etc. But within that, I've lost track. Sort of like busy.
When was that though?
2003.
Okay.
We brought it out, and that's why I was mentioning it. The foreword is actually written by Russell. And this is before he even pitched to be the new showrunner.
Because he's a big fan.
Because he's a big fan. But he actually put in the forward that he'd slightly fallen out of love with Doctor Who because it wasn't there. And he got into Big Finish. And Big Finish had restoked his imagination for Doctor Who. And he was now so excited about finding out what was coming next for the 8th Doctor, for this, for that. And it's a lovely piece he wrote, and literally a year later, he was announced as the showrunner. But he also he said to India Fisher, he said if there had never been a Charlie, there would never have been a Rose, because it made him think about the dynamic between the Doctor and the companion.
Yes.
Because of the interaction between Charlie, played by India, and the 8th Doctor, played by Paul. And, I remember, it's interesting because, I can't remember, who's the podcast guy I did the interview with earlier? Where is he?
Crispy.
Hello, I'm up the top.
Oh, you're up the top. Hello. Oh God, I didn't even know you were all up there. Hello. Crispy asked me some questions about beginnings of Big Finish, and I went off on a tangent, and I basically didn't have to ask another question. I do this, as you may have noticed. It brought back the fact that when we went to Panopticon in 2003, it was the 40th anniversary. 7 years previously, they'd had the movie, it had failed, that wasn't going anywhere. There was sort of a feeling that Big Finish was Doctor Who at the time. And our Doctor and our lead companion, Paul McGann in India, had won favourite Doctor for the 40th anniversary poll and favourite companion, beating out Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen, who traditionally got those awards. And that came as a bit of a shock to everyone, including us, to be honest. And we were like, whoa. And then, as Janet knows, Paul was very reticent about doing conventions, and I'm sure he was asked in the past after he did the movie, and so I had to sit down with him and say, you've just won Best Doctor for 40 years of Doctor Who, and they're doing an award ceremony which was going to be on UK Gold, and UK Gold was sponsoring it, and I was like, you need to be there. And he was like, oh. And he was like, I shouldn't I? So he came along and did it. Now you can't stop him going to conventions because he loves it. But he was so reticent. And I remember, I was joking, I saw him a couple of weeks ago, we went for a drink.
I'll just pick that name up off the floor.
Well, do better than that. So we went for a quick drink because he was in London and we wanted to chat over a couple of things. And I said, do you remember going on stage? And he said, yes. And I said, do you remember that we were in the wings? And I said, right, so I'll go on first, introduce you, and then India will come on like half an hour later, and we'll talk about Doctor Who. And I said, no, we're all going on together. Because he was so worried. But on the video, there was 1,200 people there, and he walks out, and it goes from 2. Because the appreciation was so huge, and he suddenly thought, oh, I'm okay, they're good.
I'll just ask a couple more questions, and then we will get Janet up on stage as well.
Sorry.
I'm guessing that when you started producing Doctor Who in audio form, when Doctor Who was not on TV, you had a lot more freedom than you have in 2023. You're probably working a lot more closely now with Doctor Who TV show.
Well, there's, I have to be careful to say, but there is a brand now. And there's a director of brand, and there is a lot of things. And Doctor Who is a very big deal. It has been for a number of years. And therefore, you have to be, now we send forward an overview of what the episodes will be, etc., so that they can say, you can't do that, we prefer it if you didn't do that, that doesn't sound right to us, etc. So there's other things as well, but the reality is that we've always had a lot of respect, and to be fair, the BBC have been incredibly supportive of Big Finish and what we've done, and Russell has always been, and Chris Chibnall was previously, and Stephen Moffat. Stephen Moffat would go to Matt Smith on set and go, oh, you should do Big Finish really when you leave. Hasn't happened yet, might do. He's been incredibly busy every time. I thought during the pandemic, and of course he was off filming House of the Dragon without telling anyone. But but there's always been a lot of support for us. But we have to respect that it's their program. So when we first started, there wasn't a program. So therefore we just did our own thing.
So they know what you're going to be doing, which suggests you know what they're going to be doing. So what's coming up on TV?
Well,
Hang on, the mics aren't working. So.
we can still hear you.
With a melon?
No, I can't say anything. I know certain things, but the reality is that it's a whole new era, and it will be defined by a new Doctor and a new companion, and it's going to be different in the same sort of way. So it's going to be great, and I'm very much excited about watching those productions. Yeah. And we will see what happens in the future.
Who's the most famous person in your phone?
Ooh. I've got a good one. Okay. You go.
Who's the most famous person in your phone? I don't know. Brenda Blethyn, Peter Davison. My mind's got a blank.
I want to go next because then you'll forget how pathetic my answer is. But Bjorn Ulvaeus from ABBA.
Whoa!
You really got to go some now. Don't give me Derek Jacobi.
No.
Don't give me Derek Jacobi.
I've got someone who's very famous.
Ian McKellen.
But some of these people here might be a little bit too young for it, but the two obvious, there's one obvious one. I've got David Tennant's number.
Yeah.
Don't mug me. Yeah, but the other one is probably the most famous person in my phone is Monica Lewinsky.
Oh!
Now I'm amazed at that. Well done.
Don't tell me you have a dress.
No, but I did go on a couple of dates. And there's the story for tonight. Anyway, so...
Good question.
Yeah. Interesting answer.
We'll discuss that later. Anyway, so, another question.
I just want to know, are you happy with the way they've changed your character in the Big Finishes?
Am I happy with the way they've changed my character in the Big Finishes?
Yeah, how they expanded the character out a bit.
Yeah, no, I think it's terrific. I love Big Finish. Don't I? So I will be getting that raise.
Who's next?
Sort of a two-pronged question for Janet and Jason. Janet, what's your opinion on Shooty Gatwa? And Jason, might he appear at some point?
Well, I think he's amazing. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he does with Doctor Who. It's going to be very, very different from anything we've seen before, I imagine. He's younger for a start, even than Matt Smith was, isn't he?
So actually, it's close. It's close. I don't know, we could Google it. Someone Google it.
He's 29. He's older.
Oh, is he? Matt was only 21 or something.
He was just playing an 18-year-old 2 years ago.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
it. That's why. I mean, he's brilliant in sex education, and I thought, oh, that's good. I mean, I thought it was good casting when I heard it. I thought that's good. I mean, I would say stay tuned, as John Nathan-Turner would say. Who knows what we would get in the future? I mean, the interesting thing is, you know, we've had opportunities with doctors before. Like, for example, we were offered Matt Smith when we were casting around for a male companion. And we decided not to take Matt Smith because he was too young to play a male companion in Doctor Who on the audio series, and 2 years later he was the Doctor. So, you know, what do we know?
Did you see him in the West End in was it called, I can't remember, it was called Face, just Face? It's Polly, what's her name? It was her first play.
Was this before Doctor Who?
Yeah, it was before
No, I didn't
Doctor
see
Who.
that, no.
Yeah,
no.
he was brilliant.
Oh, I saw him after he became Doctor Who on stage in a play, and he was amazing in it.
He was with Lindsay Duncan. He was with Lindsay Duncan, and it was just superb.
Just on the Judy Gatwa question and Big Finish, let's say he's the Doctor for 3 years. How far ahead are you planning with Big Finish?
I mean, there are series which we planned for 2030.
The year
Yeah,
2030.
we've actually recorded stuff for 2030.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Not with me, you haven't.
No, we haven't. There's probably a reason for that. Because, you know.
She's young.
You're in Queensland.
Yeah, no, so, yeah. I mean, because you're so young, you see. So we don't need to stockpile.
Nice say.
Yeah. So there are. We do plan ahead, absolutely, and we planned a long way ahead, actually, in some cases. And then we know there's certain anniversaries coming up, and there's other things coming up. It's like, for example, the work we're just about to release next month, the first chapter of Once and Future, which is our 60th anniversary story, which peaks for November, and that was planned about 4 years ago. Because we knew we needed to get all the doctors and companions we could into it, and again staggered it out and so forth. It's a good job we did start planning it so long ago, because the pandemic caused a lot of problems, specifically with Sylvester, because Sylvester was living in France and then couldn't get back, and then we couldn't get stuff to him, like mics, etc. And Sylvester's not the most technical person anyway, whereas Colin is now recording from home and doesn't want to come into the studio anymore. He's got a brilliant setup, he's got everything there, and he's like, oh, I can't be asked, I'll just do it from here. Fine.
But it's not the same.
It's not quite the same, no.
It's not the same. You know, being together in the studio, being rude to each other at lunchtime. Being rude to each other at lunchtime, taking the mickey out of each other. You know, it builds camaraderie.
It does, absolutely, especially if you repeat that.
Yeah.
And Sarah.
When you are recording in the studio, the audio, you all see each other, you react off each other, and you record as separate tracks that you can then edit later.
That's the intention. When we heard the Moat Studios, which unfortunately don't exist anymore, because Toby was in this position of long story, but basically had to give up the moat. We had isolation booths which were in a horseshoe, which faced in on each other. So therefore, they were isolated. There was a little bit of bleed, I've got to say, but it wasn't really anything. And it's amazing how doctors and companions always had their favourite booths.
Yeah.
They always go to the same ones.
Absolutely. Come into my booth or take my booth at your peril.
Very proprietorial, but now we're at a different studio where they've only got one isolation booth usually in a studio, and we're all in different areas of a dead studio. so that it's not real bouncing off the sides. But we do have to be a little bit careful about crossing over these days. But yes. I mean, do you find it as a different technique now that you have to be a little bit wary of, or don't you care? Yeah.
No, I'm careful. Of course I'm careful. Yeah, no. It is different. You do use more eye contact, funny enough, when you're working, because you're across from each other rather than side on, so that you've got that kind of it. It's more like a read through, than it was when you were in the sound booths.
I'm always amazed by how much physicality is going on.
Yeah, because you do tend to you gesticulate a lot,
to get the emotion and everything, physicality in your voice.
Yeah.
Paul McGann's brilliant at that. I mean, he comes out of it, looks like he's run a marathon.
Yeah.
He's done so much.
Yeah, and his son, of course, is working.
Jake. Yeah, Sonny, as he's
Sonny, as he's now called. But I remember him as an 8-year-old, coming into the office. So yeah.
And sorry, what's Sonny doing?
He's a producer of Big Finish now. Yeah, it's all in the family.
Jason, how much of Big Finish is actually canon?
Well, what is canon?
All of it.
It's a difficult one. I mean, it's what you want to take as canon. To be honest with you, I mean, I think there's a stronger argument with the Paul McGann productions, because apart from the movie and 6 minutes on Night of the Doctor, there is no Paul McGann. So I think generally within fandom they accept that is his time, and certainly all would think that. In fact, I think it's I think the time between Planet of Fire and Caves of Androzani with Nicola Bryant, where we've managed to put in probably about 45 productions, is a bit of a stretch, to be frank, because they are quite obviously on television pretty much after each other. They must have done a hell of a lot of adventuring in a few weeks. So that's where it becomes a bit of a stretch. But canon is what you personally believe. I know that's dodging the question a little bit, but it is true. I mean, if you're happy to accept the Paul McGann, the 8th Doctor series as being canon, then that's great. I think that's our big contribution to Doctor Who, is the work we did with Paul.
What you said before about the BBC wanting to know what you're doing and saying please don't do that or hold off on that for a while suggests that they hold Big Finish as canon.
And they have said in the past that it is canon, I wouldn't force canon on anyone. It's up to their own personal beliefs. And it sounds like religion, doesn't it? I wouldn't force religion on anyone, but it's interesting. I mean, the best example I can give, which I can't talk about now, is that we had a story with Queen Victoria in when just prior to Russell doing the first Chris Eccleston series. And Russell went, no, you can't do it. I was like, And so we watched that series, and Queen Victoria didn't turn up. He was like, no, because he already had the first 2 years in his head. He had, because it was 2 from Glory in season 2, which became David's first season, and he already had that so far in his head that he didn't want to contradict. So it's a give and take thing, so there you go.
What does the BBC not want you doing over the next 3 years?
What's the best question?
I think the bottle's really good, actually. Designed. Which is down the side. It's half full at the moment. It's slightly negative.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry.
How has the fandom experience changed in the whole time you have been doing it? Is it a fandom that's what's different? I'm really curious.
Well, it was a different experience for me because I was a Doctor Who fan, still am a Doctor Who fan, but I now do things like this, where I'm in front of other fans, telling them things. So it became a different journey. But I got into Doctor Who fandom because there was an article in Doctor Who magazine about fanzines, which I hadn't heard of before, and they were listing all the best fanzines. And it turned out that one of them, which was called Sharda, was written by a guy called Gary Russell. And they gave his address so that you could send off. In those days, they would never do it now.
No,
but they gave his address so you could write off to him and said how much you write off and you'd get the fanzine. And I thought, oh yeah, I'm reading through. And I suddenly realised that my house was there and Gary Russell's house was there, around the corner. So he lived within 2 minutes walk of me. And I was 15 at the time. And rambunctious 15-year-old as you do. I basically went, on Saturday, I went round and knocked on his front door. And the rest is history.
People don't necessarily, do you know who Gary Russell is?
Yeah.
So he was the first script editor of Big Finish?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he was co-producer with me, and then he was nicked by Russell.
Yeah.
To be a script editor on Doctor Who, Torchwood and Sarah Jane.
Wow.
So he did a lot, and then I nicked him back to come here to produce Prisoner Zero up on the Central Coast. So, there's been I've known Gary Russell since I was 15. And if I hadn't knocked on that door, there is an argument that Big Finish wouldn't be here today.
Wow.
And Gary Russell hates spiders.
He does.
Yeah.
Yes. It's awful. They used to bully him in the office up in Terrible, and they used to send files which were like, "Can you check this artwork, please?" And he'd open the file, and it was a photograph of a spider. He'd go, "Oh, and they'd leave spiders, plastic spiders in interesting places. I mean, for a guy who's an arachnophobe, coming to Australia was not the best idea.
Hello, I'm Nicola Bryant, and this is the Sirens of Audio. Wow, I'm in it now.
All right, fascinating stuff. Boy, he's got some interesting stories to tell, Philip.
Yes, I love who he had it on his phone. The most famous person on your phone. So, you young people, you won't know. Look up Monica Lewinsky, you won't know who she is. But for us older people, it was sort of, you heard, it caused a stir on the day. And I was lucky enough, actually, that night we went out for dinner, a few of us, and he told the whole story. But I can't repeat all that. But anyhow, nevertheless, fascinating story and fascinating lady.
Excellent. All right, so do come along. We are dropping this episode early, as you may have noticed. I don't know if I said that before, Philip, but I'm saying it right now, right at the end. So a couple of days early, this episode is out, so you can get a bit of a taste of what's in store for the weekend in Sydney when Sophie is with us. So I'm looking forward to getting back together in person with you again, Philip. That should be good.
Yeah, it'll be great.
So until next time, guys, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.
See you later.
This has been the Sirens of Audio, episode 153. Jason Haigh-Ellery with Janet Fielding, live in Brisbane, with your hosts Philip Edney and Dwayne Bunny. Original theme music composed by Joe Kramer. Our website is sirensofaudio.com. You can email us at sirensofaudio@gmail.com or contact us via any one of our socials. Thanks for listening, audiophiles. We'll hear you next time.